There she is, boys, just as we left her. Man, I wonder if I can lift this engine out of here. Oh yeah. Well, as you can see, I took pity on this old flathead. It's an 8 horsepower. Got it all cleaned up, hosed down, and decided to, I thought it was locked up, but this sucker turns over and it feels like it has compression. So I don't think it was necessarily locked up. I think maybe just the belts were frozen onto the pulleys or rusted onto the pulleys, which was preventing the engine from turning over. So I think we're going to try to get this thing running, boys. 8 horsepower flathead.
Let's do this.
Oh boy.
Oh jeez.
All right. So we've dried out a little bit around here. The sun has been shining for a couple of days, and man, that thing's rusty. And it looks like, man, like they dropped battery acid on the darn thing or something. It's so rusty. Normally I just fix what's wrong with these things, make them run good. But on this one, I think I'm gonna go ahead and clean up that engine cover a little bit. I think our first step in getting this thing running again is just start taking some of this stuff apart. So I'm going to want to take off this oil spout. So I think it would be a good idea to drain out any oil that's in here. Looks like we have a little bit. All right, so this is how I'm going to do this. There's a little bit of oil in there. Well, that's not much. Man, that was not much oil at all. But the thing seemed to have compression. So I'm just going to continue taking it apart. See how rusty it is on top here. So what do I need? My 7/16. Good. They didn't break. I feel lucky. Looks like to take off this gas tank I need Allen wrenches, of course. Just going to spray a little bit of lubricant on these bolts here, so hopefully the tank won't be that hard to get off here. Looks like I'm going to have to get a wrench and hold the back side. Yeah, so these are basically just straps that hold on the gas tank here. Something. Man, that's the little bugger right there. My tool, it's so rusted, my tool doesn't want to seem to go in. Okay, try to get a grip on this sucker. Oh boy, that's not going to work. Alright, so I'm not asking anymore.
That's how it's done, son.
All right. Coax the fuel line off of here, and we'll get this tank out of the way. Sometimes a little bit of lubricant can help you. Here we go. All right. Let's see if we can keep taking this thing apart here. There we go. Get this air filter out of the way here. All right. We have these two bolts here. 7/16 socket. Rusty. And that's a 5/16 socket. To take off the oil dipstick. Okay. So that's the little bracket that holds the dipstick on. Let's see what we have here. Ew.
Nasty.
But I've seen worse, believe it or not. So you can see how rusted that front got. I don't know if someone spilled battery acid on that or what, but I think I'm going to take off these brackets just so I can paint them up, make them look pretty. That's something you don't hear me say often. Oh dang, those are head bolts as well. At least these three are. Maybe I'll take the head off just to see what the piston looks like. That might be a good idea anyways. So these two bolts here were different, so I just want to remember that. Have to get that wire out of the way.
Nasty.
It's the fuel line. It's actually the fuel line. I'll be replacing that anyways. Put these bolts back in so I don't forget they were different. Look at that chunk of dirt. Looks like that side cover needs to come off too. Looks like there's just one bolt underneath that holds on. Yeah, I want to clean up all these fins and repaint this cylinder probably as well. Make this thing look nice. You don't hear me say that very often. What do you say we take this head off just so we can see what the piston and cylinder walls look like? I don't think you have to remove anything except for the head bolts, and then that head comes off pretty easy. Looks like we have this one that holds the muffler on. So these three bolts are different. I don't know why. They were the ones I think that held on that other little bracket. So don't get those mixed up. Boom! How easy is that? All right. So that's what the underside looks like. A lot of carbon buildup. A lot of carbon buildup. Looks like our head gasket was good. We'll replace that, of course. You guys will see me reuse a lot of gaskets. Head gaskets you cannot reuse. Alright, so let's see what this cylinder looks like. So I'm just rotating the flywheel here, and check it out. Rag here. And that cylinder wall feels like glass. No scratches or anything in there. And that's what you want to do, is you just want to inspect the cylinder walls for any sort of scratches. You can always feel them with your fingernail if they're deep enough to cause a problem, and they're caused from overheating. But you can see this cylinder wall looks really good, so that means the piston probably looks good too. So I'm going to run it. And it looks like I can still see the crisscross honing pattern in the cylinder wall too, so that's always a good sign. When you can see that crosshatch in there, you know that the cylinder wall is still good. I'm going to clean off this little rim here. You can see you get carbon. You can see you get carbon buildup right on the rim here, and you want to carefully sand all that off. And of course, we're also going to decarbonize the head here. I don't think that was even the correct spark plug that was in there, but this is what we have. Looks good. This engine's so dirty, I want to put something down in here so nothing falls into the engine. And the starter motor here, you have just 2 bolts on each side holding it on. Got my 1/2 inch socket here. Hopefully I can. Yeah, if you turn the starter motor, there's a flat split on each side. Well, It's kind of hard to get to it. Looks like I can get to that side pretty easy. Looks like that side I'm going to need to use a close box end wrench. There we go. Oh, all right. Got to remember where all this stuff goes here. Okay, so not quite sure what that bracket's for. Was that holding the? Is that holding that like that? It must have been. All right. And the dipstick tube just pulls out of here. There's still a little bit of oil left in there I need to drain out. And this went to the fuse. And this is a diode right here. So yeah, this goes to a fuse, and that's a diode right there coming out of the alternator. So you don't ever want to cut this wire. You want to keep this part intact. That's where the diode is. And I think what that diode does is decrease the voltage that comes out of the alternator under your flywheel here. So that's the power that comes out of your alternator from under your flywheel. The starter motor is pretty stiff. That probably needs to be rebuilt also. At least cleaned up, all the rust and whatnot. I'm going to put these starter bolts back in so I don't lose them. You guys do that? Otherwise I'll lose every nut and bolt I take off if I don't do that. So now if we go over to this side, we're dealing with the exhaust, the muffler, and the carburetor. It always makes me nervous taking off old rusted on muffler bolts. Let's see, this one has two here because I've snapped them before. So I think what I'm going to do is put my heat gun on these babies and heat them up, or maybe even a torch, and get them pretty hot before I try and take them out so they don't break. Tech tip number 656. Heat up these damn bolts before you try to take them off. Especially when it's cold outside. Just keep them on there for a couple minutes. That should heat it up pretty good and hopefully prevent it from snapping off. So I was working on a carburetor a few years back out in the garage when it was about 30 degrees, and it didn't end up very well. So you do want to be careful in case you need to reuse this screw. You may get one in the rebuild kit, but I think you might have to reuse it. So I locked these pliers on, and it looks like they're working. And we'll try that again. Yeah, it definitely turned. Good. Boy, that was a real stinker. This carburetor is now useless. So that's what I mean by the bolts get brittle when they get cold. So warm stuff up, folks. Especially if it's rusted in place. Alright, let's get these lock tabs out of the way here. Hopefully these bolts have had long enough to heat up. Looks like it's 7/16 sockets. I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I'm going to use my impact driver here to try to take them off. I think we're good there. Yep. They came off pretty easy. I'm pretty sure that's because we heated everything up. Well, I don't want to speak too soon. That's for sure. There we go. Yep, I don't think either of them broke. Oh, dang, man. That one did break. Crap. Yeah, see? That one broke.
Son of a...
Oh man, I hate it when this happens. What a bummer. You know, everyone will give you advice on how easy it is to get out of there, but they're all just talking shit. It's never easy to get out. It actually looks like it's been broken for a while, so it may not have been my fault. Yeah, if you look, I think it's been broken for a while. Alright, I think I'm going to get this, take this carburetor off and out of my way. At these bolts that hold on the carburetor intake, you can't get a socket on them. They don't give you enough room, but they slotted them so you can use a screwdriver. But I mean, how much torque can you get on a damn screwdriver? Not much. Yeah. So these two bolts, and then we have a little support bracket down here. Let's hope we don't break this one off. Oops. Alright. There we go. Oh, we actually still have the linkage that it's attached to. Forgot about that. So on this carburetor we have two linkages on the back. One's for the choke, one's for the throttle. It's so dirty I can't even see how they disconnect here. Oh, I see. That one pulls out like that. Put it back so I don't lose it. And then this one, yeah, if you turn the carburetor this way, it comes right off too. Looks like the spring is broken here, so that wasn't attached. But it was right at the end, so we can bend the end. Take this old nasty fuel line off of there. Look at it, broke. Pretty brittle. Well, there we go, folks. Good old-fashioned Briggs and Stratton carburetor. Yeah, so as you can see, this engine still has a ton of crud on there. So this is about as far as I'm going to tear it down. Actually, I do need to take off the flywheel because I may replace the oil seal underneath the flywheel there. But I think I'm just going to spend some time scraping off the big chunks here and cleaning up the outside of this engine as much as possible. Pretty dirty. With this much oil buildup everywhere, I'm probably thinking that the oil seal that's underneath the flywheel here, when they start to leak, they basically just fling oil everywhere. So that's probably what's going on here. Scraping off the big chunks, boys. and girls. I've got some gals that wrench, that watch my videos, which I think is pretty cool. I think I'll spray a little bit of carburetor cleaner on some of these thicker spots here. Help loosen up some of that oil. Alright, let's see if we can get this flywheel off of here. Oh yeah. Knew those were going to be stuck. Oh boy. Where's my penetrating lube, man? Okay. Let's see if we can get these off without... There we go. That's the stinker. Alright, so I'll try this old trick. See if we can bust it loose. We getting anywhere? Gotta do what you gotta do. Ta-da! Now we have to take off that bolt. Or that nut. Spray a little bit of lube on there first. Let it sit. So the only socket I have that fits is the 24mm. So it's easiest to get this nut off with one of these, because when you try to loosen it, the flywheel just turns. But I have a trick. Because a lot of you don't have compressed air. Let me show you how it's done, son. So basically, you just put on your wrench and you're going to give it a good whack. You'll feel it when it breaks loose. Sometimes you have to get it a few times. Oh boy, yeah, it's loose. There you go, kids. That's how to do it. Take that off. And you have a little washer in there. Looks like the flywheel key is intact. So that's good. So yeah, now you're either going to need a puller or know a good trick. And guess what? We know a good trick. So let me show you how to get this flywheel off, because it's pressed on for the most part. So you can screw the old nut back on here and do this. I happen to have a knockoff tool, what it's called. And it screws on. And you bottom it out and then you take it off about one turn. And here's what you do. You find a good spot on the engine to where you can pry up on the flywheel a little bit. But you don't want to break anything. Looks like over here there's a little spot that I can kind of stick this under and pry up a little bit. You don't have to pry up a lot, just a little bit. And then you give her a good whack. Look at that. One was all it took. Sometimes it takes a few. Sometimes you get lucky. Don't want to lose your flywheel key here. But there you go. So this flywheel is, this flywheel is equipped for electric start. You see the outside gear here. All of our magnets are still in place, so that's good. They do need to be cleaned out. You can see there's a lot of stuff in there. And this is what you have. More dirt and spider webs to clean off. And yeah, I could see possibly a little bit of an oil leak here, so I'm sure we'll replace that oil seal. A lot of buildup. So eventually we're just going to have to hose this thing down. Oh, that helps. So that's as far as we're going to tear it down, I think, folks. Well, I'm going to spend a little bit of time cleaning this up. Try to get off all the big chunks. Just a little bit of gasoline here is what I'm using to try and break this stuff up. A little bit of water's not going to hurt. All right. All right, folks, we're still pretty cold out here. So I've been heating up this engine block. I've cleaned it all up the best I'm going to clean it. Tried to degrease it as much as possible. I've got a little spray I use. Cleaned it up the best I can, get all the grease off of it, heat it up. So we might as well give it the old $3 tune-up. Doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it looks better than what we had when we started, I'll be happy with that. So I'm just trying to get this to at least, 70, 80 degrees. If I get it too hot, it'll cook the paint. But it's just so cold and wet out, I think it's important to try and warm it up a bit. So I took off these little brackets here. I think those hold the fuel line or spark plug wire or something. But you can see how nasty some of these covers are. Looks like we spilled battery acid on there or something. I don't have many tools to use to clean this up before I paint it. I tried wire brushing a little bit and it helps a little. I do have this little cheap flapper wheel. I don't know if it'll work. I'm going to give it a shot here. Yeah, I think it's going to work, but it's making a big mess in here. I'm going to have to go outside and do this. So I'm going to call that good enough. Just keep painting stuff. So here's the piece where this one broke off. You could see we can get to it from here. But this piece is going to be pretty hard to sand, and it's quite rusty. So I think I'm just going to soak this, and this washer's quite rusty too. I think I'm just going to soak these pieces in vinegar for now. And what we use here is just plain old white vinegar. We soak it for a day or two. And I decided that I wanted to keep the fuse with the engine here, so I went out to the carcass, cut it off, put that fuse back in here and put it back together, so we have our setup here. And this red wire just goes straight to the battery or the battery terminal on the solenoid. So you can see this cover is really bad. So I'm going to use a coarse grit sanding sponge on this. I'm going to get a little more of this off the front so we can read the model numbers here. Dang it. I'll go ahead and put a light coat on the inside, even though I didn't clean that up. Hopefully that'll slow down some of that rust. Well, looks a little bit better. That's all we're going for. Well, here it is. You knew we were going to have to get into it sooner or later. This old school Briggs and Stratton carburetor. Let's check it out. This is a 1/2-inch wrench here. Oh boy, that's stiff. Oh yeah, okay. Wonder what the inside of this carburetor looks like. This motor's been sitting outside for several years. Well, not too bad. That is a nice surprise. All I have to do is clean out the float bowl. Probably be a good idea to replace the float valve at this time. Let's see what it looks like. Looks like our O-ring is still in place here. The float bowl O-ring. Can pull this float pin. Alright, so this style float and float valve has because it's all metal, it has a rubber seat down inside there, or it should. Yeah, so you'll have a rubber seat. Because this is metal, you'll have a rubber seat down in there. If this needle here had a rubber tip on it, then you wouldn't need the seat down in there. But so let's see if we can get that out. We're also going to have to take off this fuel valve here, or at least take it apart. Make sure everything works and it's not all rusted up in there. Seems to be working. Alright, I'm not going to pay attention to where this setting was because I'm going to start with the factory setting once we get this thing running again. So let's take out the pilot screw adjustment. I don't think there's any O-rings or anything down in there. Nope. Just this little piece here. Your metering screw is what that's called. And let's see what's under this. Not quite sure. That might be a way to get the, oh boy, the main jet out of there. Or maybe that is the main jet. Ooh, that's a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. Yeah. Alright, so this tube here, you can see there's some very tiny little holes all up and down that you'll want to make sure to poke out, as well as a hole up through the middle, all the way up the length of it. And you also have some holes up here at this part you need to make sure are cleared out. And let's go ahead and remove this piece too, just so we can make sure that everything's good and clean when we go back together. This is kind of a weird screw down in here. It's an odd size for a screwdriver. I can see through it, so I'm not sure if I'm going to keep trying to remove that or just leave it. It looks like this is the piece that does most of the work up in there. And with these old brass floats, what you always want to do is shake them and listen for gas that's sloshing around in there, because that would mean it's leaking. Whoa! Excuse me. Well, I was just looking. So that's the throttle mechanism. So the throttle plate would be in there. There's no way to get to that throttle plate for servicing. So that's kind of weird. Probably not a very good design for the old men that were designing this. Oh, maybe to service the throttle plate, you have to take out this Welsh plug here. Then you'd also have to take out the choke plate down in there to get to the throttle plate. Pretty primitive design. Alright, let's see what's inside this fuel valve here. Well, that looks pretty straightforward, I guess. I don't think there's anything in there that can be replaced. Okay. Put it back together. I'll clean it out and put it back together. Oh, okay. I did find one O-ring right there and a little washer. So I'll replace that little O-ring there. I have a universal O-ring kit. Has a bunch of little O-rings in there. That's what I used. Gotta figure this out here. So I think to put these back together, you have to turn this all the way in and then tighten this down. Not too tight. Yeah, that's how you tighten this up. Otherwise it locks up. So that's how it's done, son. I'll just leave this wide open for now. I'd like to clean off some of that rust. So this is a little tool I have to pull out these rubber seats. Boink. Oops. Easier said than done sometimes. Come on out. Sometimes they get stuck down in there. Ah, get out of there, buddy. There it is. So this is the green one. Most of them are red or white, but this is like the blue one here. So make sure you put the right one back in. And try not to be as rough as I just was taking it out, because you don't want to really scratch up that part too bad. So I'm going to save this little piece and compare it to the new one, make sure it's the same one. I'm also going to order a new float bowl O-ring. But overall, the inside of this carburetor looks pretty good. That's another reason why I'm confident in not having to take out this little part here. I'm pretty sure it's just a passageway for fuel to get up into the, I believe this is the main jet. And this is just the main jet metering screw that goes on the bottom of the carburetor. It meters the amount of fuel that goes up through this tube here and through this passageway. So it's very important to make sure every little passageway in this piece is cleared out. There's some very tiny ones on this long part, and it also has to be clear out all the way up through. Well guys, unfortunately I just got some
Really bad news.
It all comes down to this here, the head gasket. So this part is obsolete. I can't seem to find it anywhere. You should never reuse head gaskets. There was nothing wrong with this one, but it has been used. I'm going to have to reuse it. I have no other choice. I don't know if it's going to work. I kind of am regretting that I started refurbishing this engine. Briggs and Stratton normally offers parts, but every once in a while they create an engine model that I guess they're not too proud of, so eventually they stop offering key parts for it, like a head gasket. I could see you still can get carburetor parts, but yeah, this main service part here, the head gasket,
obsolete.
So apparently this engine is meant to go to the scrap pile. But I'm going to go ahead and reassemble it. And see if we can get it to fire. Just 'cause. Well, that sucks. But what else are we going to do? We can throw it in the garbage can. Or we can put it back together and at least sell it as a complete unit. Or maybe it'll run, who knows. So you'll want to lightly sand off this carbon ring in here. Just don't scratch up the cylinders too bad. I roll up a piece of sandpaper like this. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to get it as clean as possible without scratching the cylinder. And then I'll use a fine grit sanding sponge here to lightly sand off the gasket surface on both the cylinder and the head. Little circular pattern works pretty good. I think I need to switch to a brass brush to get some of this carbon off of here. Because it's brass, it won't scratch the aluminum, hopefully. See if this works any better. Yeah, this works better. Works better than sandpaper, and you won't scratch the cylinder. Get yourself a brass brush. Tech tip number 6466. Works much better than sandpaper. in getting this carbon ring off of here. And any other carboned up areas for that matter. Like around these valves. So yeah, this black ring is basically the combustion ring. And that's why you get the carbon buildup there. That's where the explosion takes place inside the engine. So now we're looking nice and clean there. That's what we want. Well, clean enough anyways. And I've never reused a head gasket before, but we have no choice on this. This one wasn't blown when I took it off. Luckily I didn't throw it away. I think what I'll do is I'll just, I mean there's a lot of carbon on it and whatnot, so I'm going to just clean it up a little bit before I put it on. Make sure the head's cleaned off. Here's our head before. You can use a razor blade for some of this heavier carbon here. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you might as well clean up some of it here since you have it off. Alright, I'm calling that good. So you want to clean out the cylinder, of course, before you bolt everything back up. And I'll put a little lubricant in the cylinder here. Just a little light layer all the way around before I button things back up. And I did get a little paint on some of our stator electrodes here, so I just want to clean those off a little bit. Alright, that should be good. Also clean off these pulls here on the, and I'll also clean off these, some of the rust off the electrodes here. And I'll clean up the flywheel a little bit. I'm hoping I don't have to set the gap on this because removing these tiny little coil bolts could be a problem. They may break. So I've been spraying penetrating lube for a couple days on these bolts here in anticipation of having to take them off. I do not want those to break because then you are screwed. Well, I think we can put the flywheel on now. Where is it? So I cleaned this flywheel up a little bit. The gear was really starting to corrode, so I'm just gonna spray some penetrating lube on here for kind of a protectant. I don't want to get any on the magnets on the inside because that might make them break loose. But this is a pretty important gear, so I don't want it to corrode away. Okay. Good idea to clean up the shaft a little bit, as well as the inside here, before you try to put things back together. So here's our key. It's a tight fit. That's good. Here we go. Make sure the key stays in place when you do this. There we go. Where's that nut? I can't remember if I filmed it, but I did soak a lot of these parts in vinegar, and yeah, they came out pretty good. Got all the rust off there. Nice. So I cleaned these pieces up a little bit, painted them, and now it's time to put things back together. So you have this piece, then you have your washer, your nut, and we torqued this down to 75 foot-pounds. So I have my foot-pound torque wrench here, dialed into 75. Doesn't really matter which way this thing goes. So don't try holding these fins, because when you're trying to tighten this, of course, the flywheel is going to turn. You need to hold the engine in place. There's a couple ways to do that. I'll show you how I'm going to do it today. All right, so here's how we're going to do this today. And I have the old pulley here that has the built-in keyway into it. So I'll just put this back on the shaft. Don't want that sucker getting stuck on there again. And then I'm just going to put vice grips on there and hold it. Biggest pair of vice grips I have. That's what we're using. And then I'll just hold the pulley, and that'll hold the shaft. Oh boy. There we go. And now I should be able to torque this down. Kind of tricky to hold everything in place here. Yeah, we should be able to torque it down now. Pretty tight, 75 foot-pounds. Not a very good angle to do this, but this is how it's getting done today, boys and girls. Jeez, that is tight. There we go. Dang, man. Whew. 75 foot-pounds is tough when this engine's not locked in place. Should have cleaned up the shaft before I put this darn pulley on here. It'll come off. There we go. Now that the flywheel's back on, we have to check this gap, this coil gap. And like I was saying, I hope I don't have to adjust it. And I don't want to have to remove these suckers because I have a feeling they'll break. So we're hoping for about a 12 gap here. Right on. And that one's set pretty good. How about this one? A little tight. But the range is 10 to 14, I believe. So a gap of 12 here should be right. Yeah. I think I'm going to run it like that. It feels about right. And I'll put one more shot of penetrating oil on here before I button it up, just in case the next guy has to get in there. See that? I'm a nice guy. Alright, so let's get this head gasket and head back on here. I'm just opening these valves and cleaning them out a little bit underneath in case any stuff got in there. You can also see I cleaned off the top of the piston, all the carbon that was on there. And I lubed up the cylinder. Looks like everything's working as it should there. Alright. Not a real good design because you have to put this stuff on because you have to put your bolts through this first and then into the head. And I think there's another piece where you have to do that as well. Is that this? Is that? That I forget. The head's all nice and clean. The head surface. And then this baby goes on. Now I'm putting this gasket on dry. As I've said, I don't reuse head gaskets, and you shouldn't do that. This is a composite style head gasket, so it should only be used once. But it's not blown. And as far as putting like copper gasket on here or something like that, I wouldn't recommend it. You know, that could cause a weak point and introduce an area that it could also interfere with the expansion of the metal. But anyways, I'm just going to put it on dry and hope for the best. Oh geez, I'm doing this upside down. There we go. Yeah. So I've got the bolt screwed up here. Alright, so I have the heat shield in place, and I think this bracket, I'm going to have to look at the tape. I think this bracket goes here. For the, the gas tank perhaps? I can't remember. It's been a couple weeks since I took it apart. So I'm just going to snug down all of these bolts. I'm pretty sure I have all the brackets on here. I think it's a bad design that you have to torque the, you have to put these brackets under the head bolts before you torque everything up. It just doesn't seem like a very good design, but who am I? So once I get all these finger tight, I'll look up the pattern, how to torque them, and the torque specification. I'm going to set my inch-pound wrench to 165 and
Tighten these babies down.
one, two, three. Yeah, so this one's 4. And we have 5. 6 down here. 7 right next to it. straight above it. And then 9 is this last one here. All right. I think we're good. Keep our fingers crossed that this used head gasket's going to work for us. And to be honest with y'all, I cranked down these head bolts a bit tighter than 165 inch-pounds since this gasket was already used once. I wanted to make sure we can crush it good and tight. And I know that's not the right spark plug, and it's way too old. It looks like it's a chainsaw spark plug, so we'll replace that. So it's your standard J19 plug that goes in there, I believe, or the NGK model, which is the the BR2-LM. Also need to sand out the inside of that connector. It's pretty rusty up in there. So that's what that looks like up in there. Not good. That's why I have a file. I'm just going to clean that up. Maybe use a little sandpaper up in there too. Alright, so that's a lot better. Could soak the end of this in vinegar for a while, but I'm pretty sure it's going to get a good connection now. Just like that. Boink, there we go. So now I guess we put on this dude. Getting close. We'll have to find a screw that fits for that one, because I only have 2. Cinch them down. Call it good. Now, yes. Woohoo! Looking good. How did this go on? Oh, that's right. The bolt in the bottom. This baby goes on just like that. All right, let's put this cover back on. Don't pinch the spark plug wire, and the heat shield has to go underneath there. All right, folks, I think we're getting back together here. Making progress, finally. Towards what? I don't know. Hopefully success. Somehow. Sure looks better. That's all we were going for. Of course, you can make it run. It's always nice too. Well, you can see it's looking pretty good. But will it run? That's the question. So here's our starter motor. You noticed I cleaned it up, painted it up, made it look a little bit nicer. But we do have a pretty big problem. It sat outside for way too long and it's rusted up. So you can barely even Barely even twist this piece. Got to loosen it up a little bit, but that's still way too stiff. So we need to service these bearings that are in here, grease them up, that sort of thing. And I don't think we're going to have to replace any brushes or do anything other than just to clean it up a bit. So let's take this thing apart. Okay, so to take this whole top part off here, it's not like what you would think. You don't take this clip off. Well, you can do it that way, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. But what you want to do is, if you look close, you see a roll pin right there. And you need to set the end here on like a socket or something just to support it. Like that. So I just have this socket here to support this end piece, because I'm going to be hitting this roll pin here with a hammer. So let's turn this so it's up and make sure that the end is supported here on a little socket. A little bit of penetrating oil here to help us out, if there is any way to help us. And I have a real tiny punch here that we're going to put right on there. Actually, that one's too small. Let me get a bigger one. Alright, so make sure to use the right size punch. It's a pretty small one. So I just have the tip supported here with a socket, and we've got our nice hard surface. And give it a whack. Yep, it's moving. Kind of have to have everything all balanced here. I can see we're making progress. Here we go. So out pops our little roll pin, and then voila, this whole piece comes off like this and stays together, so that's nice. And you can reuse your roll pin. So once you have that off, this piece just normally lifts off of here, but we're pretty rusty, so might have to pry it a little bit. There we go. And you can see how that goes on. It's just a slotted circle, and the shaft has that slot there. Okay, so we can take this whole thing apart now. Alright, let's see what we have here. We have these two bolts on the end. Hopefully they don't break. Please don't break. Oh! Oh! Didn't break. Good. Let's go ahead and loosen up this other side too. There's just two of them. Now these are long bolts. They go all the way through and screw into the end cap here, and basically it sandwiches everything together. There's one. You guys might be surprised at what we find in here. It's pretty easy. Not many parts to it. A lot of them don't even have ball bearings. They just have like bronze races instead of bearings, which just need to be scuffed up, cleaned up, lubed up and put back in, and they work just fine. So I'm hoping that's what our situation is here, is that this the starter motor was just locked up from sitting outside in the rain for too long, so it was rusty. Alright, let's see what happens. Yep. Okay. So that's a magnetic pull to get that sucker out of there. Those are your magnets. And looking down in there, the magnets are still good. And you can see your brushes down in there. So this end cap here should just come off. There we go. Yeah. So this is all we have here. The cylinder piece with your magnets. I'll remember it was that side up. And the magnets are still good inside there, you can see. And that was up, so I'm going to put it this way. And you can see our brushes here. I mean, they look to be in pretty good shape. They don't seem to be that worn down. And that in the middle there is our brass or our bronze bushing, which acts as our lower bearing for this shaft here. So we'll want to clean up the shaft. And inside this bearing here, sand it out and then lube it up. And then we're going to have to do the same with this top bearing. And this piece should come right off. So this is where we're locked up. I can tell it's very hard to spin. Okay. Come on. Okay. Yep. So that's, I believe, what you call your armature. And I don't see any problem with this one. It looks like it's in good shape still. Can clean up the brush side a little bit here. And we'll be cleaning off this shaft. You can see there is quite a bit of rust on the shaft here, so we'll want to sand that down with some fine grit sandpaper. And then most importantly, this bearing here in the top cap, which it looks like a brass or a bronze bushing. We also need to sand that out, clean it out real good, and lube it up. Maybe with a lithium grease. I don't know what the best grease is, but put it all back together and it's going to work perfectly. So on the armature here, this is the surface that comes in contact with the brushes. So you'll want to just clean out these little grooves with a, you don't want to scratch it, but you know, you want to kind of scuff it up, make it clean, and clean out all these little grooves. I have a plastic brush, stiff bristle brush I'm going to use here and just clean up this end. If you have some electrical parts cleaner, you can put that on there and clean it off that way. And this is where the bearing rides. You can see how it's kind of rusty, pitted up, so you want to sand that with a real fine grit. You don't want to scratch anything up, you just want to remove the rust. So look at that, looks 100 times better already. Oh, I just noticed there is a thrust washer on here, so don't lose that. So we're good on that end. Let's go ahead and clean up this end. This end wasn't that rusty. I have some sandpaper rolled up here. Poke that down inside the bearing. Sand it out, sand it out. This wasn't the one that was in bad shape though. It was the top cap. So let's focus on this one. It really doesn't take much to clean these up. As I said, I'm just going to scuff up the brush surface a little bit so it's nice and shiny. Doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing does. So what we need to do is poke these little brushes back in, and basically we're going to have to hold all 4 of them in at the same time while we drop the armature down on it. Hold them in place. Can you do it? Yeah, you could do it. It's just kind of hard. Let's see. What's the best way to do this? Let's just put this thing on it. And just do one at a time here. One side at a time. Let's see, what's the best way to do this? Well, it's definitely a tricky part, getting this armature in place and pushing down all of these brushes. So I think I decided the way to do this is to just set this thing on here and work your way around pushing these little brushes into place. One at a time. That one's in. That one's in. That one's in. All right. Well, I finally got it just by kind of doing one at a time here as I was putting this armature on. So we're on. Now you just have to hold it down. And yeah. And this piece, oops, don't let it pull it out. There we go. Which way did this go? I think it went like this. Put some white lithium grease on the shaft here. Everything seems to be going back together nice and easy. That's how I like it. Sometimes this can be a little tricky lining things up here. There we go. I bet you'll be able to turn this thing with ease now. Yep, that's what you want. I'll also sand the inside of this gear a little bit just so everything works smoothly. So basically all we're doing, folks, is removing a real light layer of rust that was on everything. And by doing that, suddenly all the pieces work smoothly again. You can see it doesn't take much. Now if this gear accidentally comes off, you just want to make sure that you put it back on with the yeah. So this gear was on upside down because you want to put it on. You have a little tapered side. This side is just a flat tooth, but on this side, I don't know if you could see it, but the teeth are actually tapered. So they had this together the wrong way. And you can see, if you look close, you can see the teeth were starting to get damaged because of that. So let's just put this on the right way. Actually, I'm going to clean this off too. So as I was saying, this goes on with the tapered side of the tooth up, because that's what engages with the ring gear. A little more white lithium grease, and we'll put this baby back on. Remember it as a slotted circle here that goes on, and then that, and we hammer our roll pin. Now you got to look closely at roll pins because they usually have a tapered side that is the side that goes in first. And if you get it in the wrong way, it can be a real pain in the butt. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but that side of this pin is tapered, so that's the side we'll try and hammer in here. And so you just have to line up the hole. Put that in place. Hammer this dude the rest of the way in. And you hammer it about flush, I believe. One more whack. There we go. We are back in action, folks. Look at how easy it turns now. Starter motor time. I left my bolts right here so I wouldn't lose them. So if you remember, the starter motor goes on, and then this bracket, the fuel tank, goes on like this. So I'm just trying to figure out the best way to route this wire. Maybe up through there. Yeah, I think I'm gonna wire it here, maybe. Yeah. So having the wire run right through that middle hole is a good way to go. That keeps it stable. Get one started, hopefully the other one over there. All right, so then this wire you can run kind of out of the way here. once you tighten things up. All right. Go ahead and tighten these babies down. Make sure this wire is secure. Crank this side down, and we're ready for what's next. What's next? One step closer, boys and girls. One step closer. All right, another cold morning out here, folks. Let's get started. I think it's time for our dipstick and fuel tank. So this gas tank, I cleaned it up, and it was still kind of foggy looking. So I sprayed WD-40 all over it, and I let it sit out in the rain for a day. And then I brought it back in, wiped it down a little bit, let it dry off, and lo and behold, we have a nice shiny gas tank again. So I think we can go ahead and take this out. This little guy down through here. Make sure you still have your rubber gasket there. Bracket here. I painted all this stuff up just so it looks a little nicer. Push it all the way in, tighten it up. Oh. So if you remember, I broke one of the bolts that holds the clamp together here. I couldn't find one in my used bolt stash, so I'm just going to zip tie it on for now. It'll be fine. Just like that. There you go. That's good enough for now. Don't argue with me, that's good enough for now. So she's starting to look pretty sweet, boys and girls. Just still have this BS to deal with here. If you remember, we have this broken off exhaust mount bolt. And those are always a pain in the butt. But you notice the exhaust port here is threaded. So I'm hoping maybe I can just find a different muffler and thread it in. That would save us probably an hour or two of trying to get that thing out. So something I also I just want to do is, you can see the valves in there, the exhaust one and the intake. It's probably because it's been sitting for so long. You know, I did confirm that they weren't stuck, but it's not a bad idea to spray a little bit of lubricant on them, just to kind of help things out once it fires up. And I'll work that in a little bit. Well, y'all, I just can't resist. I'm kind of waiting for some carburetor parts right now, but I want to test this engine out. Yeah, I know you want me to test it out too. And we can do that. have a brand new battery here. Hopefully it's charged. Set of jumper cables. Fill this baby up. Gonna put in about 20 ounces first. Probably takes almost a whole quart. Always has cracked me up that Briggs will write on here in big letters, "Do not overfill." But then they don't tell you how much you're supposed to put in. Doink. So I'm going to put in a full quart. See where we're at. Quart number 2. I think it's going to take about a quart and a half now that I think about it. Probably a little less than a quart and a half. Let's see where that puts us. That's about a quart and a quarter. All right, let's see where that puts us. Yeah, looks about right. Positive, positive, negative to negative. So now I'm just going to touch the positive here to my starter motor. See what happens. Better yet, I think a better way to do this is to maybe disconnect the ground here, get good and connected, and now you can just touch the battery and things will go. All right. So that's what I'm doing over there. And over here, hope I can hold on to this engine if it fires up. Over here, I'm going to spray a little starting fluid in the intake port, which is this one. Now hold on to your seat, folks. This is where it gets interesting. That sounds like a good engine to me. Right on, let's rebuild that carburetor. Well, that is a good feeling now that I know that it's not going to be a waste of time putting this thing back together. So with that little test, we have determined that it does have spark and it has compression. and we provided the fuel. So if we rebuild this carburetor, this should be a good engine. And we'll see if that head gasket holds, but definitely has compression now. Haha! So our parts came in. So there's the part number. And you can see you get 2 float needles. But one has the rubber tip. And of course one is the steel, the all aluminum one, which has the seat. So you get both styles in here. So I'll be saving that other one for another job in the future. So the clip, you just push that baby in place like that. Go ahead and get rid of this old float needle. And do pay attention to which way this clip is. Put this new one on the same way. And hopefully this was the right way. We'll see when we put it back together. All right. You can see this float has a little bit of damage. That can happen if water gets into the carburetor and then freezes. It crunches it. Whoops. But we shook it. There was no liquid in there, no gas in there, so it still floats. I'm sure it's fine. Put this guy back on. So we were pretty lucky. This carburetor was nice and clean on the inside. So much so I felt like I didn't have to remove this one brass piece that's down in here. I think that's what they call the nozzle piece. I did remove this piece, which is the piece that goes down on top of that. And if you look, you can see up through there, so I'm sure that's fine, because as I say, the carburetor wasn't that dirty to begin with. So Briggs and Stratton, with these needle seats, you can see they're pretty much the same color, at least at one time they were the same color. But I've seen, what, brown, red, and this kind of green-blue color from Briggs and Stratton. And they're all unique, so you have to make sure you get the right one. And as always, if you look at the seat, one side has grooves like that, and the other side doesn't. So the side that has grooves is the side you press down in. So the grooves go down. It's always a good idea to clean out this area before you press that seat into place. I'll spray some lubricant in there too to help this little rubber piece get down in there. And what you use is the right size punch, or this is a tecumseh tool, but I think it might work for this. Sometimes these Briggs seats get stuck on this tecumseh tool, but I think I can do it here. Yeah, because this one's kind of loose on here. So remember, the grooves go first. Groove side down, baby. You just press it in, and you don't have to push it that hard down in there to seat it. Just want to make sure that tool didn't pull it back out here. Nope, it's in place. Alright. One thing I did want to show you is the main jet here, the adjustable main jet. If we take this screw out, you're going to have an O-ring down in here and a little brass washer. Let's see. Don't lose that little brass washer. And that's an O-ring there. You can get a rebuild kit, but I think we're good. I'm just going to use this one for now. And I'm sure it's sealed. I'm sure it's going to be just fine. If not, I'll order the rebuild kit. So yeah, here's your main jet, which is what holds the float bowl on. And this is your pilot jet adjustment screw, which we took out of, what was it, here. And so one thing we need to do is there's a fine little brass jet down in there, and we're going to have to take a piece of wire like this and poke that down through it, because it's a very small passageway that we need to make sure is cleared out. And this is what adjusts the amount of fuel and air that goes through that jet. So alright, so I'm poking this piece of wire all the way down through, so I know that little passageway is clear. Never hurts to use a little bit of carburetor cleaner down through here. So just make sure the screw is nice and clean. And I believe, well, we'll find out what the preliminary setting is on that. All right, so then this piece, we want to make sure it's got little holes all up and down this little tube. It's like threading a needle. There we go. And then all the way up through, we want to make sure is clear. So get a long strand here. Poke it all the way up. And if you look in the little hole up here, you can see your wire poking through, so you know it's all the way clear. Or you can put a little bit of carburetor cleaner up in here and watch it shoot out. Yep, see that? So we got to put him back down in there. I would have liked to have been able to get this brass piece out, but it was just in there way too tight, and I'm not even sure if that part was available. And I could see that it was clear for the most part, and this carburetor wasn't dirty, so I'm pretty sure everything was clear. All the way in. Not real tight, but tight enough. There we go. I'm going to reuse this float bowl gasket. It's a fiber gasket, and I think it'll seal again because I want to save this one. It was like $8 or something for my next job. All right, one last little cleaning here. And let's put this, and I'm not sure if it really matters which way you put the clip on your needle valve here on your float. Put him back into place here.
Oh yeah.
Get our float hinge pin back into place. Oops.
Oh yeah, buddy.
Just like that. And now with most of these old carburetor float setups, you want to make the float level all the way around, if you know what I mean. So you want to hold it horizontal and look all the way around and make sure the float is level all the way around. If it's not, then you just bend the little tab here on the needle valve, and that way the float sits up a little higher or a little bit lower, whatever you need. But I'm looking here, and this thing looks pretty even all the way around to me, so we're going to go with that. And then one last cleaning of the inside of the float bowl here. You see I painted everything. Looks all snazzy. Normally when I'm working on stuff, I just leave it dirty as heck. Put it back together and not really give a crap. This one I figured we'd kind of restore and make it look nice. Cheapest way possible. Alright, so we'll put this float bowl back on. Make sure nothing's in there. Nice and clean. Don't forget your washer. This. And once you tighten this up, you'll do the same thing as you did with this jet. You will tighten it in all the way until it stops. Not any tighter, just until it stops, and then you back it out. I think it's a turn and a half on this one and 1 turn on this one. Let me go check. Oops. Almost forgot this little brass washer on my main jet here. There we go. I should probably clean off this needle a little bit. Oops. All right. Let's tighten this baby down. Make sure this isn't tightened. When you tighten this down, you could break something. All right. Now this, as I was saying, you screw it in just until it stops, and then you back it out half, 1, 1.5. We still have our rubber gasket there for the air filter, and the gasket for the intake manifold actually stayed in place Can condition it a little bit here, and I'm sure it's going to work just fine using the old one. I know you guys hate it when I do that, but it'll work fine, trust me. So if you remember, the spring here was broken. So all I'm going to do is get some pliers and twist another loop into that thing. Looks like that side's okay. And if I remember right, the broken side was the side that went to the carburetor. Alright, watch this. Zoink. There, we got a hook now. I'll make it look a little nicer than that. Perfect. So, let's see. Where did this stinker go? So that's the choke. This was the throttle. So it looks like the linkage and the spring hook into the same hole on this one. So I have the spring and the linkage through the throttle there. And so here's the choke linkage, and it just goes in like that. Alright, I'm excited to get this thing back together, boys and girls. Woo! Check it out. Got a new muffler for it, and it threads right in. I do need to get the lock nut for it still. They called it a low-tone muffler, so we'll see about that. I'm just going to leave this off for now. But more importantly, we've got to have the carburetor ready to go back on. So I can see up in there where I need to connect the throttle linkage off the carburetor. And then the choke linkage just slides through a slot back here, which is easy enough. So let's see if we can do this. Remember, we have these pain in the butt slot head screws that mount up. Pain in the butt. Okay. So also on this one we hook up the spring and the linkage through the same hole up in here. I've found when it's a tight squeeze like this to hook up the spring first. It's usually the easiest way to go. Oh, wait a second, man. That spring's broken on that side too. I'm going to have to review the tape. I think this is the end that attaches to the carburetor now that I look at it.
Review the tape.
So I'm going to try to hook up the spring first. Actually, I think I'm going to disconnect it from the carburetor here. And I double checked. This long part goes towards the carburetor, so we're good there. So let's go ahead and hook up the spring. I think this is the easiest way to do this. Hook up the spring first, and then put the linkage through. Alright, so we're in place there. And on this end, we'll do the same thing. We'll put the spring in first. Alright, make sure nothing's bound up here. the choke goes in its little slot. It's kind of hard to hold everything in place. Go, we hook up the breather tube. Yeah. Just make sure the linkage doesn't get, or the spring doesn't get all kinked up when you're trying to put this thing on. Everything's looking good. Alright, we'll want to crank these down as hard as we can with the screwdriver here. You can also use a box end wrench to get at it a little bit. So these wires over here, this is our kill switch coming off the magneto or the coil. So the coil will fire unless this is grounded somewhere. So, and this here is the charging circuit off of the stator, the alternator. So this goes to nowhere at this point. This would go to your battery, but it's okay just to leave it exposed for now. And once we start this engine or need to kill the engine, we just ground this out to one of the bolts, and that'll kill it. Almost forgot that bolt. The 5/16 screwdriver wrench like this is a good wrench to use on these small bolts. You can't generate enough power to break anything, usually. So I think I'll put this muffler on temporarily, and if we hook fuel up to here, I think we can test this engine out. So as you can see here, I put on a fuel line as well as a fuel filter. There wasn't much room, but I was able to fit one up in there. So we can gas this thing up. Oh boy, that was a wild ride. It seems to be running pretty good. We just need to dial in this carburetor. Something's not quite right on the mixture yet. There we go. There we go. I pretty much have it dialed in. That was a rough ride. Well, there she is, boys. Reused head gasket and all. Running pretty sweet. I'll put that air filter back on. Fine tune the carb. We'll be ready to roll. Well, there we are, folks, in all her glory. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, considering I thought it was going to be a complete failure. But yeah, I cranked those head bolts down, didn't I, Bun? So I cranked down those head bolts, and everything seems to be holding up. No gas leaks. Runs great.
For sale.